Hello, Sonoma County. I'm Susan Gorin, Chair of the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors. Thank you for joining us. I am interviewing today James Jasperse, who is our Chief Engineer and Director of Groundwater Management with the Sonoma County Water Agency. Jay, I'm so delighted that you could join me today with 5 questions from Susan. Hopefully you'll talk with us about the important work that the Water Agency has been doing historically, but certainly in these years of crises, emergencies, fires, COVID, and all of the other challenges that we've had in the past, flooding and drought years. We can't thank you enough for helping to keep our local water supplies safe. So let's talk a little bit more about our watershed. What is it, and what are the impacts of the Walbridge and Myers fires to the watershed?
Thank you, Chair Gorin. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Watersheds in general really provide several important services to our community. They help retain the rainwater and stormwater we get so that it slows it down and lets water infiltrate to replenish our groundwater basins, but also helps so that we don't have big floods or flash floods. It also purifies and filters our water for good water quality within the streams that we have here in Sonoma County. And it also supports, important ecosystems throughout the county. And so fires can disturb the characteristics of the watershed. Clearly, we all know that. And they can disrupt, especially when they're fresh fire burns, some of these characteristics or functions and services these watersheds provide until those watersheds can then naturally regain their abilities to carry on these benefits. And so, some of the things it's obvious. Some of them are, the vegetation is burned, so that filtering capacity and retaining of water. But fires, if they're hot enough, can also really burn the top of the soil structure and destroy the soil structure too. So that you can get more of a glassified surface so that when rainwater hits it, and this is what we really are concerned about in the watersheds after the fire, is that these big, strong winter storms come in that we call atmospheric rivers. These high intensity storms can come in, and instead of the watershed being able to provide for filtration of that water, as well as have that water infiltrate into the groundwater basins, it really rushes off, and it can erode soil, cause flash floods and the like, debris flows. And we've seen this across the state in the western United States. And so this is a concern that we have, especially right after the fire has occurred.
We have a somewhat complicated watershed and water system. Our water supply not only is the groundwater in Lake Mendocino and primarily Lake Sonoma coming down the Russian River, but it also includes all of the tributaries leading into those bodies of water. And our water supply actually is incorporated in the groundwater as well. So when a fire happens, we form watershed task forces, and I know we were just so grateful for our community organizations for protecting our watersheds from all of the ashes in the burned out structures. So tell me what the Watershed Task Force has been doing and is now starting to reformulate and do it all again.
Yes, this is our 3rd time in 4 years. We first formed a watershed task force after the 2017 fires, and again, just less than a year ago with the Kincaid fires, and now we are in our 3rd incarnation with the Walbridge and Myers fires. And so the watershed task force really is a multi-organizational organization. It's not an organization, but it's a gathering of entities, governmental, but also local, organizations that work in the watersheds, at mostly the local level, but we also have some state and federal agencies too that participate in this. And we really, the big value of it is really to facilitate coordination amongst all of our efforts, and for an information exchange. You can imagine that, a burned watershed is immense in scale, and it gets a little daunting. But it's also involves a lot of highly skilled people who are in these various organizations. Some may be fisheries biologists, some are engineers or hydrologists, water quality specialists, whatever. But getting together and having an ability to kind of organize ourselves is really important. And we found that out in 2017. And I think that structure, that Watershed Task Force, serves us really well. And I think the two major objectives of the Watershed Task Force are one group works and focuses mostly on evaluating the watershed impacts, like public safety, water quality, or environmental ecosystem, and assessing the risks associated with that. And that's the side of it that I get involved with. The other part of it is really how do we put in projects, erosion control projects, best management practices in the watershed. Where do we go? Where are the high priority places? And what are the types of practices or erosion control we put in to minimize those risks? And so that is where you get especially a lot of the community groups really making a huge contribution, as well as other organizations too, and the county organizations. So that's really kind of the overall purpose and structure of what we do in the Watershed Task Force.
In 2017, we know we lost many thousands of structures across the county, but primarily in Sonoma Valley and Mark West, and a little bit in the northern county. Different parts of a watershed and different watersheds. Kincaid Fire, same thing, up in the hills, slightly more removed from the Russian River. How does the Walbridge Fire compare with those two fires, especially from the perspective of the watershed and the drinking water supply?
So the Walbridge fire, and we're still working with CAL FIRE to really assess the burn severity and look at the impacts. But its location is in general more remote, clearly more remote than the Tubbs and the Nuns, the 2017 fires. There are fewer structures or fewer infrastructure impacts just because of where it's located. However, it is located in some critical areas that are associated with our regional water supply, namely Lake Sonoma, which is owned and operated by the Corps of Engineers. And then also, it's near Sonoma Water's riverbank filtration system on the Russian River, as well as other public water supply systems. Sweetwater Springs Water District, City of Healdsburg has wells off of Dry Creek, and Town of Windsor has wells off of the Russian River too. So those are definitely more of a concern given the location. The other big impact that we're really looking at here, in addition to public safety and water quality, is the ecosystems. There's several really sensitive tributaries and streams where a lot of effort has been put in to restore coho salmon. And a lot of these pretty fragile ecosystems we're anticipating have been highly impacted. And so again, more work has to be done in the coming days and weeks to really ferret that out, but that's another huge concern.
So explain that interesting acronym, the Watershed Emergency Response Team, known affectionately as the WERT.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit what they actually do, what they're doing right now, and the results of that.
Okay. Yeah, the Watershed Emergency Response Team, or the WERT, is CAL FIRE led. It's led by CAL FIRE, not by any of the local agencies such as the county or Sonoma Water. And after a fire, if it's more significant enough, CAL FIRE will make the decision whether to stand up a work team. And a work team consists of specially trained individuals of different expertise. There may be geologists or ecologists or hydrologists, engineers, and they're specially trained in fire science and fire impacted watersheds. And so there has to be certifications. And these teams are deployed, and they have been just deployed really within the last few days at the Wallbridge fire in the LNU complex to really do a rapid assessment. So it's meant to be pretty quick after the fire. And their priority is to look at risks or impacts to public safety. And that's what they're focused on for us this year. In 2017, they also looked at, in addition to public safety, they looked at public health, water quality, and the ecosystem impacts. Last year for the Kincaid, the WERT, and this year the same thing. Given the abundance of fires, sadly, and the lack of resources, the WERT teams are really focusing on public safety. So that means they're looking for areas that might be susceptible to flash flooding or debris flows or landslides, kind of what we call geohazards. And what I was talking about earlier, when the winter storms come in again and can exacerbate the conditions and cause some of these geohazards, which can be a risk to public health, public safety, and infrastructure. So that's what they're focused on, and they really do four steps to the whole thing. Just quickly, the first thing they do is they use satellite imagery to look at the burn area before it was burned and after it was burned, and they can get the image differences, the reflection back to the satellite changes between before and after, and they have algorithms and formulas where they can then correlate that to the degree of burn severity across the burn area. Then what they do is they take that satellite imagery and their teams go out in the field and they field verify it. They do certain tests. They look at critical areas, maybe steep slopes, other areas where there might be some sensitive communities, at risk, they think. And they do some additional field testing. And basically they verify and correct the satellite maps to end up get what they call a burn severity map. That's the second step. The third step is they put in all of the potential, what they call values at risk, all, homes and different assets, water supply systems, etc. And then the final step is then the U.S. Geologic Survey, as part of this team, runs computer models to really simulate different storm events, like a 1 inch per hour storm, etc. And that will show, hopefully, where the potential risks are for public safety. They then share that with us at the Watershed Task Force. And those of us who are working on, okay, now let's prioritize, here's some risk areas. Now let's prioritize where we're going to do erosion control or other measures. These are the high risk areas. And we identify what response measures we can do. So that's kind of how they work. They're separate, but they work in close coordination with the Watershed Task Force.
The burn area was so large with the Wallbridge fire, it's incomprehensible to me that even a very sophisticated team is going to be able to really understand the extent of the damage and the threat to a very valuable watershed and our drinking water supply and salmon spawning habitat. But it sounds like you have confidence in this method that we're going to get the answers that we need to mitigate the risk posed to the public safety, water quality, and ecosystems. So what can members of the public do to protect our watershed either and encourage mitigation, restoration? Can we actually engender some volunteer efforts to help?
Absolutely. And it's important to work, I think, with members of the Watershed Task Force and agencies that have experience, some of the NGO organizations that have experience putting these devices such as wattles, because if you do it incorrectly, it can actually exacerbate a problem. So there's a technique and a skill to it. And so it's really important to coordinate with, you know, the county and the county departments or the county watershed task force leads, as well as some of the community groups that have experience doing this. But I would also say that it's important, and we saw this in after the 2017 fires, just if you live in those areas that were burned or you're downstream of them, you should be situationally aware. And understand, at least in general, the risks that could be posed if a storm comes in, so that you are monitoring weather, you're monitoring Nixle and other warning systems. After the 2017 fires, coming out of that, you know, this whole process we described, we did put in some water quality monitoring programs and some erosion management that we've talked about, and also some early warning systems that, you know, we installed the Sonoma One Range system to cover the Tubbs and Nuns critical areas there. And we had notification where people could sign up for alarms. If a rain gauge near them or a stream gauge rose to a certain level, they would get notified and alarms so that they could be situationally aware. They could also get online at any time to access pictures of the local rain gauge or the local stream gauge if it was starting to rise really fast, so that they could also take action themselves. And within the first 2 years, that system had 2.5 million visits during the stormy season. So it was, I think, well received. So those things are some of the things that can be pursued down the road, perhaps. But being situationally aware is really important.
Can we get those views or information through the Sonoma Water website?
Yes, you can. Either the Sonoma Water website or just Google Sonoma One Rain, and it should get you there too.
We were also instrumental in locating and advocating for fire cameras around the perimeter of Lake Sonoma and elsewhere so that we could get early warning about potential fires. Were you involved in that?
Yes, I was. And that came out of, again, this general process where we determined that we learned about fire cameras in some limited locations in Lake Tahoe area and San Diego, where the developers had put in at University of Nevada, Reno, and University of UC San Diego had put in some cameras. And we were the first area out of those research hubs to add in cameras in our region. We started with 8 that came out after the 2017 fires, and then worked with other partners. And now we have well over 30 or 40, and we have a full network. And I'm sure, I know those are very popular, have been over the last 3 years. And so that's another way to be obviously situationally aware too.
And we feel much more secure knowing that we do have some fire cameras, some eyes in the skies, detecting early warnings, puffs of smoke, lightning strikes, so that we can evacuate and put out those fires as early as possible. Jay, it's such a pleasure to talk with you this afternoon, and we didn't even go into why I call you Dr. Groundwater. We've really been talking about the surface water vitally important for 600,000 people in Sonoma County and Marin County. Maybe we could schedule another opportunity to talk about the wide world of groundwater and your role in the groundwater sustainability agencies. Thanks, Jay, so much for all that you do. Our community is well served by your expertise and guidance in all things. So thanks for your hard work, and thanks to all of our residents for tuning in this afternoon. For more information about watershed recovery, visit socoemergency.org. See you next time.